Let me tell you about the night I asked an alien the wrong question. Or maybe it was the right one. I still go back and forth on that. Some nights I lie there and I think if I just kept my mouth shut, none of it would have happened. The good and the bad. And some nights I think it was the only honest thing I did the whole year I spent out there. You want to know the funny part? I wasn't supposed to talk to him at all. I was a nobody. Maintenance tech, third shift, on a relay station so far out that the light from home took a couple 100 years to reach us. We didn't even rate a real name. The Concord called it Junction 7 Delta. Everybody who actually lived there called it the Drum, because of the way the outer ring hummed when the gravity plates cycled. Low and slow, like a heartbeat you couldn't quite hear, only feel in your teeth. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. The Drum. So picture this. You ever seen one of those old photos of a deep-sea diver? Tiny little guy in a huge brass suit, standing at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded by things that are so much bigger and stranger than him that you wonder how he doesn't just lose his mind. That was us. That was every human out there in those first years. We'd been in the wider galaxy for 11 years? 12. Long enough to be allowed in the door, not long enough for anybody to take us seriously. The big species, the ones who'd been doing the starfaring thing for 10,000 years, 20,000 who knew, they looked at us the way you'd look at a kid who wandered onto a construction site. Cute. Possibly going to get himself killed. Definitely going to be in the way. The Drum was where the new species got parked. That's the polite way to say it. Officially, it was a cultural integration and logistics way station. Unofficially, it was the galactic equivalent of the back room where they keep the folding chairs. You had a couple dozen species crammed into one rotating ring, all of us either too new or too poor or too unimportant to be anywhere better. And it was loud. I don't think people get that when they imagine space. They imagine quiet. Stars, silence, the whole peaceful black. The Drum was never quiet. There was the hum, like I said, and there were the vents always ticking. There was the market level 2 decks down, going day and night because half the species there didn't sleep on the same clock and some didn't sleep at all. You'd hear a Thren merchant arguing prices in that wet clicking language of theirs, and underneath it some Pell kids playing a game that involved a lot of screaming, and somewhere a pump that needed a new gasket. That was my pump, by the way. I knew the exact whine of it. And over all of it, the recycled air pushing through the station like the place was breathing. It smelled, too. Hot metal and ozone and whatever the Thren ate, which I never identified and didn't want to. After a while you stopped noticing. After a while it just smelled like home, which tells you something about how long I'd been out there. My shift was the worst one, third rotation. The dead hours when the market thinned out and the station went into its low-power cycle and the corridors got that blue half-light that made everybody look like they were underwater. I'd push my cart around the maintenance spine, checking valves, swapping filters, listening for anything that sounded wrong. You learn to listen doing that job. You learn the building's voice, when it's healthy and when it's sick. I was good at it. I'll say that much for myself. I wasn't good at much out there. Couldn't speak half the trade languages, couldn't haggle, couldn't fight worth a damn, but I knew machines. Machines I understood. Machines didn't look at you like you were a kid on a construction site. There were maybe 40 humans on the whole station. We mostly kept together. There was Petra, who ran the hydroponics on the green deck and had a laugh you could hear 2 corridors over. There was old Madsen, who'd been a merchant marine engineer back home and never let you forget it. There was a kid named Tully, 19, who'd lied about his certifications to get the posting and was terrified somebody would find out. I covered for him more than once. We did that. We covered for each other, because nobody else out there would. And then there was the night the Iron Column came in. The soldiers. I felt it before anybody told me. That's the thing about living inside a machine, you feel it when something changes. The hum shifted, just slightly. The station was rerouting power, big draws coming online, the kind of load you only see when something massive is docking. I checked my pad and the docking schedule had gone dark. Just a blank. Restricted. That never happened. The drum took anybody. We were the folding chair room, remember. Nobody restricted the docking schedule for the drum. I went up to the observation gallery on my break. Couldn't help it. Curiosity's a human thing. I'd learn just how much of a human thing later, and I wanted to see what was big enough to make the whole station hold its breath. There were a few others up there. Petra, a couple of the Pell, one of the tall, feathery Avani who worked customs. Nobody was talking. We were all just looking out through the gallery glass at the ship sliding into the dock. I don't have good words for it. I've tried telling this story before and I always come up short. It was dark. Not painted dark, built dark like it had been grown out of something that drank light. No running lights to speak of. No markings you could read. It was long and lean and it had this forward edge to it, this sense of motion even when it was barely moving, like a blade laid flat on a table that still somehow looks like it's about to cut you. There were gun emplacements down the spine of it, dozens, more than any ship that size should need. It dwarfed our docking arm. It made the drum look like exactly what it was. A back room, a nothing place, a folding chair. I heard one of the Pell whisper a word, sorry. I don't have a search result here. I'm just telling you what I remember. One of the Pell whispered a word, and the translator in my collar caught it and rendered it flat into my ear. Goth. I didn't know the word. The Avani did. She made a sound, this low warble, the kind of sound a bird makes when a hawk's overhead, and she said, very quietly, iron column. And the way she said it, I didn't need an explanation. But she gave me one anyway, because the Avani were one of the few species that bothered being kind to us. The iron column, she said, was a Koth military order. Old, older than the Concord itself. They didn't take contracts, they didn't take orders from the council. They went where they decided the law had failed and they made it unfail. With force. She said the Koth had a saying about them, and the translator chewed on it for a second before it gave me something close enough. Where the column stands, the ground remembers. What does that mean? I asked. She looked at me with those big dark eyes. It means, she said, that they do not move, and things that try to move them die. Great, I thought, wonderful, real reassuring. I went back to my shift. What else was I going to do? A warship the size of a small moon had just parked at the drum, and I had a gasket to replace on a coolant pump on deck 4. The galaxy is enormous and terrifying and mostly indifferent, but the pump still leaks. That was the lesson I kept relearning out there. The pump still leaks. You still have to fix it. What they wanted. Word went around fast. It always did on the drum, 40 humans, a few hundred others, everybody packed in a tin can. You couldn't keep a secret if your life depended on it. And it turned out some lives did depend on it. The story was this. There was a man on the drum the iron column wanted. Not a human. A Thren, one of the merchants from the market level. Big operation, lots of cargo coming through, the kind of guy who always had a smile and always had a deal. His name was, the translator gave it as Karen, but everybody just called him Karen. I'd bought a heat lamp off him once for my quarters. Decent guy, I'd thought, talked too much. Overcharged me, probably, but decent. Turned out Karen wasn't moving heat lamps. Or he was, but underneath the heat lamps he was moving people. Refugees. Whole families off a world called Senate that the Concord had written off after a civil war, written off, meaning they closed the borders and let it burn. Karen had been running them out through the drum, hidden in cargo, falsifying manifests, getting them somewhere they could disappear and start over. Now you think that's a hero, right? You think that's the good guy. That's what I thought. But the Concord had laws about that. Population transfer across closed borders, that was a capital offense. The kind of thing they sent the iron column for, because the column didn't bother with trials. The column didn't bother with the council's slow grinding courts. The column showed up, named the guilty, and carried out the sentence. That was the whole point of them. That was what the Avani meant. Where the column stands, the ground remembers. They'd come for Karen, and anybody who'd helped him. And here's the thing that turned my stomach when I heard it. Standing in the maintenance break room at the dead end of third shift, with a cold cup of something that wasn't quite coffee in my hands. Tully had helped him. The kid, 19, lied about his certs to get the posting. He'd been doing odd cargo work on the side for extra credits, the way half of us did because the Concord paid us in script that was barely worth the storage it took up. He'd helped move some of Karen's containers. He probably didn't even know what was in them, probably never asked. You don't ask out there. You take the work and you keep your head down, and you try to send a little something home to a planet you'll never see again because the trip's too long and too expensive, and you took this job knowing that. But the column wouldn't care whether he knew. The column dealt in facts, not intentions. He'd moved the cargo. His ID was on the manifests Karen had faked. As far as the iron column was concerned, that made him an accomplice to a capital crime. And the column had already posted the names. The list. I saw it myself, the list. They'd put it up on the public boards all over the station, those big amber displays where they usually posted dock assignments and quarantine notices. Now they showed a column of names, in about 6 different scripts so everybody could read it in their own language, and a single line at the top that the translator rendered for me as, "These will answer, by the authority of the column at the turning of the next cycle." The next cycle, that was about 9 hours away. Karen was on the list, 2 of his Thren associates, a Pell dockmaster who'd looked the other way, and down near the bottom, in plain, blocky human letters because the column had bothered to render it for us specifically, was a name I knew. Tully, MRCUSJ Human Accessory. I stood there in front of that board for a long time. There were others around me, reading it, going quiet, drifting away. Nobody wanted to be seen looking at it too long, like the list could grow, like looking might put you on it. I'm not a brave man. I want to be clear about that because of how this story ends and because I don't want you thinking I was ever anything special. I fix pumps. I keep my head down. I've spent most of my life being exactly the kind of person nobody notices, and most of the time that suited me fine. But that was the kid's name, Tully's name, and I'd covered for him with his certs, which meant in some galactic ledger I didn't get to see, I was probably already halfway onto that list myself. I went to find Madsen. Madsen says no. Old Madsen had a theory about everything and a plan for nothing. That was his whole personality. He was sitting in his quarters with the lights low, and when I told him about the list about Tully, he didn't even put his drink down. "Nothing to be done," he said. "He's a kid." "He's a corpse," Madsen said, "is what he is, and so's anybody who gets between him and them. You ever see what the column does to a station that hides somebody? I have. Heard about it anyway, Hellas Reach. They didn't just take the man they came for, they took the heir. That's a story. Everything's a story until it's you." He finally looked at me, old eyes, tired eyes. "Listen to me, I've been out here longer than any of you. The only way you survive among these people is you remember what you are to them. You're nothing, we're nothing. And the second you forget that, the second you start thinking your little human feelings matter to a thing like the iron column, that's the second you die. The kid's gone, mourn him after. Don't join him." I won't lie to you. Part of me wanted to listen. Part of me always wants to listen to the Madsens of the world because they make giving up sound like wisdom. But I kept thinking about the kid's face. Tully had this nervous laugh, this way of laughing before he even finished a joke, like he was apologizing for it in advance. And I thought about him going up to whatever the column did, alone, with 40 of his own kind on the station too scared to even look at the board for too long. So I did something stupid. I went to find the commander. Where the column stands. You don't just walk up to the iron column. I want you to understand that. They'd taken over the whole upper administrative deck, kicked out the station's own staff, sealed the corridors, posted guards. And the guards. I'd seen Koth before. There were a couple living on the drum. They're big, the Koth, but they're people, they argue, they laugh. One of them ran a noodle stall I liked. The column wasn't like that. The column's soldiers stood in the corridor in full plate, dark like the ship, and they did not move. They didn't shift their weight. They didn't look around. You'd walk past one and you'd swear it was a statue right up until its eyes tracked you. Just the eyes, this slow swivel, and then nothing. Like you'd been weighed and found to be not worth turning the head for. The ground remembers. I got it now. Standing in that corridor, I got it in my body, in the back of my neck, in the cold dropping down through my stomach. These weren't soldiers the way I understood soldiers. They were a sentence the universe had already passed, just waiting to be carried out. I shouldn't have gotten as far as I did. I've thought about this a lot. I think they let me. I think a small, soft human walking up to their checkpoint with his hands open and his voice shaking was so far beneath being a threat that they were almost curious, like watching a moth fly at a window. I asked to speak to whoever was in charge. The guard looked at me, just looked. I'm not exaggerating when I say I felt my heart in my fingertips. And then a voice came from down the corridor. Low. The kind of voice you feel in the floor. The translator picked it up and put it in my ear a half-second behind, so I heard it twice, once in his language and once in mine, and both times it was the calmest, most terrible thing I'd ever heard. Let the human come. The commander. His name was Val Saron, though I didn't learn that for a while. The column didn't go in for introductions. He was Koth, but where the others were dark, his armor had this dull red worked into the seams, old and dried blood colored, and his face. The Koth have these heavy ridged faces, sort of like if you took a man and a bull and a mountain and split the difference. His face was scarred down one side, an old burn, the kind of thing that doesn't heal right. One of his eyes had gone milky. The other was sharp as anything I've ever seen. He was sitting. That surprised me. I'd built him up in my head as something that stood forever, but he was sitting at a table that had been the station administrator's, going over manifests on a glass slate, and when I came in he set it down and folded his hands and looked at me with that one good eye and waited. I'd had a whole speech in my head. I lost it about a step into the room. What came out instead was, "There's a name on your list, the human one, Tully." He didn't know. Saron was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, the translator gave me every word evenly. Knowing is not the law's concern. The cargo moved. He moved it. He's a kid. Your young reach adulthood at what age? I hesitated. 18, around there. Then he is not a child. He picked the slate back up like the conversation was over. Your species is sentimental about your young past all reason. It is one of the many things that will get you killed out here. And see, here's where Madsen would have been proud of me, because the smart thing, the surviving thing, was to leave. The man had spoken. The sentence was passed. The ground remembers. But I was angry now. The fear was still there, God. The fear was still there. It never left, but the anger had come up underneath it like heat under a pot. I thought about the kid's nervous laugh. I thought about Madsen saying mourn him after. I thought about 40 humans hiding in their quarters because looking at a board too long might get them killed. And I thought about something else, something I'd noticed without noticing. The way Saron held the slate, his hands. The Koth have big heavy hands and his were shaking, just a little. A fine tremor he was holding very still to hide. And the table in front of him, there was a cup on it, station issue. The same cheap stuff I drank my not coffee out of, and it was half full and cold. The surface gone skinned over the way a drink gets when it's been sitting for hours and hours. He hadn't slept. I'd have bet anything on it. The most feared soldier in this part of the galaxy was sitting at a borrowed desk at the dead end of the night cycle, hands shaking, drink gone cold, going over the same manifests again and again. And before I could stop myself, before the smart part of my brain could grab the words back, I asked him the question. It wasn't clever. It wasn't brave. It wasn't anything I planned. It was just the thing you ask another person when you've spent your whole life fixing things and you can see, plain as a leaking pump, that something in front of you is broken. I said, "When did you last sleep?" The question. The room changed. I don't know how else to say it. The two guards by the wall, I'd half forgotten they were there. They moved, both at once, this small shift of weight that meant a thing I really didn't want it to mean. The temperature didn't change, but it felt like it did. Saron went absolutely still. The slate lowered. The good eye came up and fixed on me. And for the first time he was actually looking at me. Not weighing me. Not finding me beneath notice, looking. The way one person looks at another when they've said something that lands somewhere it wasn't supposed to reach. "What did you say?" he said. It wasn't a question. I should have backpedaled. Instead, and I really can't explain this part, except that something in his face made me sure, I kept going. "Your hands are shaking," I said. "Your drink's gone cold. You've read those manifests so many times you've got them memorized and you're still reading them. You haven't slept. Maybe not since before you got here, maybe a lot longer than that." I swallowed. My mouth was bone dry. "I fix machines. That's my whole job, all I'm good for. And I'm telling you I know what something looks like right before it breaks, sir. I know exactly what that looks like." One of the guards said something fast, sharp. The translator gave me fragments. "Insolence, permit me, end this." And Saron lifted one of those shaking hands, just 2 fingers, and the guard went silent like he'd been switched off. For a long, long moment the commander of the Iron Column just looked at me. The hum of the station went on under everything, low and slow, like a heartbeat you couldn't quite hear. And then he did something I will never forget as long as I live. He laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It was barely anything, a short, rough sound, dragged out of somewhere deep and rusty, like a door that hadn't opened in years. But it was real. And it was so completely the last thing I expected that I just stood there with my mouth open like the idiot I was. "Sit," Valsaron said. So I sat. You have to understand how strange that was. There was a chair across the desk from him, the station administrator's chair, I think, a nothing chair, the kind you'd find in any office on any deck, and I lowered myself into it the way you'd lower yourself into a chair next to a sleeping animal you weren't sure was actually asleep. Slow, ready to be wrong about everything. The two guards by the wall didn't like it. I could feel that. But Saron had lifted his 2 fingers, and apparently that was the whole law in that room, because they stayed where they were, dark and still, those slow eyes tracking me down into the seat. Saron looked at me for a while. The cold drink sat between us. Up close I could see I'd been right about all of it, the skin over the surface. The way his good eye had that red rawness in the corners that you get when you've been awake so long your body's forgotten how to stop. "You are a maintenance worker," he said finally. "Third shift, yes, sir." "And you came here, to me, to argue for the life of a young one who is not your blood, who you are not responsible for, knowing what I am." He said it slowly, like he was turning it over, checking it for a trick. "Why?" I opened my mouth to give him some noble answer. I didn't have one. So I told him the truth, which was smaller and dumber and the only thing I had. "Because nobody else would," I said. "And somebody had to, and I guess it ended up being me." What he carried. He was quiet a long time after that. Then he started talking. And I want to tell you, I've thought about why he did that, why the most feared soldier in that whole arm of the galaxy unloaded himself onto a sleep-deprived human pump technician at the dead end of a station's night cycle. And the only answer I've ever come up with is the simplest one. Because I asked. Because in however many years he'd been carrying out the law of the column, traveling from station to station, passing sentences, standing on ground that learned to remember him, not one single person had ever looked at him and asked when he last slept. Not one. They saw the armor. They saw the list. They saw the dried blood red in his seams and they got out of the way. Nobody ever saw the man holding the cup. He told me he had been with the column for 90 years. Koth lived long. He told me he had come up under the old code, that the column in the beginning hadn't been what it was now. It had been a thing for the places the law couldn't reach. Frontier worlds, lawless stations, the dark corners where the strong ate the weak and the council was too far away and too slow to care. The column went to those places. It stood between the strong and the weak. Where the column stands, the ground remembers that hadn't started as a threat. It had started as a promise. It meant, here finally someone will not move. Here you are safe. And somewhere across 90 years, he said, it had curdled. The council had figured out they could point the column at anything they called a crime. The borders the council drew got harder and crueler. And the law he'd sworn to, the law that was supposed to stand between the strong and the weak, got turned around. Now it stood between desperate people and the only doors they had left. Now the weak were the ones it crushed. Senate, he said, the word came out heavy. You know of it. I told him what I'd heard. Civil war, borders closed, a world written off and left to burn. I have read the manifests, he said, and he picked up the cold cup and turned it in those big shaking hands and did not drink from it. The cargo your young one moved. Do you know what was in it? People, I said, refugees off Senate. Children, he set the cup down. The last manifest, the one with your young one's mark on it. 31 survivors out of a hold raided for cargo. 19 of them were children, the youngest not yet weaned. The Thren, the one you call Karen, he overloaded the hold past safety because he could not bring himself to leave the rest behind. 2 did not survive the transit, the cold. He stopped. The good eye came up to me. I have read this manifest 40 times. I have it by memory. And I keep reading it because I am looking for the part where these are criminals, and I cannot find it. There is no such part. There are only children, and a fat smiling merchant who could not leave them to die, and a frightened young human who carried boxes for credits and never asked what was inside because asking would have made him responsible. And he was right. It would have. He went quiet again. And at the turning of the next cycle, he said, by my authority I am to kill them all. The thing about orders. Now here's where, if you've heard 100 of these stories, you think you know how it goes. The good human says some stirring thing about freedom and the alien throws down his weapon and everybody hugs. I've heard those stories too. They're nice. They're not what happened. Because Sauron wasn't a man looking for permission to be good. He was a man who'd already worked out exactly what was right and was telling me, very plainly, that he was going to do the wrong thing anyway. You think because I see it I will not do it, he said, reading my face. The Koth are good at reading faces. It's one of the few things they have in common with us. You are sentimental like all your kind. Listen to me, human. I have 1,000 soldiers on that ship. I have a code I swore at an age before your species learned to make fire. If I refuse this, if I stand the column between the council and these children, do you know what happens? I didn't say anything. The council declares the column broken, renegade, and they are not wrong by the letter of it. And the next ship they send is not one I command. It is one that has not read the manifest 40 times. It comes here and it does to this entire station what I would have done to 31 souls. They take the air. Every species on this drum. Your 40 humans. Your young one dies anyway, and everyone he ever stood near dies with him, and I have spent my refusal on nothing. He spread those big hands. That is the law I serve. It is built so that no one man's conscience can stop it. It is built so that even I cannot stop it. That is the genius of it, and that is the horror of it. So do not look at me like I am a coward. I have run the numbers more times than you have lived years. There is no door out of this room that does not have bodies behind it. And I sat there. And I want to tell you something about being human that I didn't understand until that exact moment. With a cold cup of station coffee going colder, and an old soldier telling me calmly why 31 children had to die. We are very, very bad at accepting that there's no door. It's our great stupidity. It's our great gift. I don't know which. But you tell a human the numbers don't work, there's no way through. And something in us, something deep and dumb and stubborn as a leaking pump, just refuses to file it away as settled. The big old species, the ones who'd been out there 10,000 years, they'd learned. They'd learned that some things can't be moved, and they'd made peace with it, and that peace was a kind of death they didn't even notice they'd died. We hadn't learned that yet. We were too new. We were the kid on the construction site, and the kid doesn't know which problems are supposed to be impossible. So sometimes the kid just walks up and starts pulling on the thing everybody else gave up on. You said the law's built so no one man can stop it, I said. My voice came out shaky. I didn't care anymore. So one man's conscience can't break it. Yes. So don't make it one man, I said. He went still. The loud idea. Here's what I'd figured out, sitting there. And I want to be honest. I figured it out the way I figure out anything. Not because I'm smart, but because I'd spent my whole life thinking about machines. And the law he was describing was just another machine. And machines have a logic you can find if you listen for the part that's whining. The law was built to defeat a conscience. One soldier with a soft heart, one commander who balked. The system was designed to root around him and grind on. That's what made it so terrible. Refusing was futile because it was lonely. One man refusing is a malfunction. The machine has an answer for a malfunction. You replace the part. But the machine had never been built to handle everybody refusing at once, because that had never happened, because nobody out there believed it could. They'd all learned better. The other species on this station, I said, the ones on your list, the Pell Dockmaster, the Thren, how many people on this drum know what's about to happen? All of them, he said. We posted it. It is the law that we post it. Right, and they're all hiding in their quarters. I leaned forward. Because every single one of them has done the same math you did. One person standing up is a dead person. So nobody stands up, so the only person standing up is always alone, so it's always futile, so nobody ever does it. That's the trick. That's the whole trick of the thing. It only works because everybody believes it works. I was talking fast now. I couldn't stop. But you said it yourself. If the council declares the column renegade and sends another ship, it does to the whole station what you won't. Right. They take the air from everyone. So everyone on this drum is already on the list. They just don't know it yet. The Pell, the Avony, the Thren, my 40 humans, all of it. We're all already condemned the second the next ship undocks. So what do they have left to lose by standing up tonight? Nothing. The same nothing I had when I walked up to your guards. Saron was watching me with both eyes now, the good one and the milky one, and I couldn't read his face at all. You want me, he said slowly, to make the refusal too large to replace. I want you to not be one man, I said. I want you to be a station. The council can call one soldier a renegade. Can they call a whole drum of 40 species a renegade? Can they send a ship to take the air from a place that every other new species in the arm is watching? You said the column used to mean here you are safe. You said it curdled because the law got pointed the wrong way and nobody could stop it alone. I ran out of breath, sucked in more. So let's make it not alone. Let's make it so loud they can't pretend it's a malfunction. Let's make it the thing the whole arm sees. The hum of the station went on under us, low and slow. You are insane, Saron said. Maybe. It will probably get us all killed. Probably, I said. But you already ran those numbers, sir. Every door's got bodies behind it. I'm just asking you to pick the door where the bodies might mean something, where the ground remembers the right thing. And for the second time that night, the commander of the Iron Column looked at a soft, small human like he was something he had never seen before in 90 years of standing on remembering ground. The turning of the cycle. I'm going to tell you what the next 8 hours were like, but I'll never get it right, because I was running the whole time and I was terrified the whole time, and most of it's a blur of corridors and faces. We didn't have a plan so much as a fuse. Saron gave me one thing, a clearance, his own mark, that opened the sealed corridors and shut off the listening gear on the public boards for short windows. That was all he could give without it being him, one man, malfunctioning. The rest had to come from us, from the station. That was the whole point. So I ran. I went to Madsen first. He told me I was a dead man, which I already knew. Then I told him about the manifest. The 19 children, the 2 that didn't survive the cold. And I watched something move behind that old tired face, some old merchant marine thing from before he'd learned to make peace with the impossible, and he put his drink down. He actually put the drink down and he said, "I know the Pell Dockmaster. He owes me. Go get the others. I'll get him." I got Petra. Petra didn't even let me finish. She'd heard about the kid already. She'd been crying in the hydroponics deck where nobody could see, because that's where she went to do her crying. When I told her there was a way, she wiped her face and said, "What do you need?" And the way she said it, I almost lost it right there. We woke up all 40 humans, everyone. And then the humans went out and woke up the others, because here's the thing nobody expected. Once the first ones moved, the rest moved fast. Turns out everybody on that drum had been doing Sauron's math in the dark, alone, sick with it, certain they were the only one. Turns out the loneliness wasn't real. It was just the trick. The second one, Pell, saw one human standing in their doorway saying, "We don't have to hide. None of us. Not anymore." The second they understood they weren't alone, the fear flipped over into something else. Something I'd never seen come over a crowd before. It wasn't courage exactly. It was relief. The relief of people who'd been holding their breath for years and finally got to let it out. By the time the cycle turned, we were all on the dock. Everybody, the whole station. 40 humans and the Thren merchants and the Pell families with their screaming kids gone quiet, and the tall feathery Avani and species I didn't have names for. We came up out of the corridors and we filled the docking concourse in front of the Iron Column's great dark ship, and we stood there. Just stood. Nobody had weapons. Nobody made speeches. We just stood between the soldiers and the holding cells where they kept the condemned, and we did not move. It was so quiet. After all that running, all that noise, it was so quiet you could hear the gravity plates cycling. That low, slow hum, like a heartbeat you could finally hear. The Iron Column soldiers came out and formed up. 1,000 of them, dark and still, those slow eyes moving over the crowd. And I'll tell you, my legs nearly went. Because for 1 second I was sure I'd done it. I'd gotten everyone killed, every soul on the drum, with a loud idea and a borrowed clearance, because what was a crowd of unarmed nobodies against the column? And then Val Sauron walked out in front of his soldiers. And he turned his back to us, to the crowd, and he faced his own 1,000. And he stood there between his soldiers and all of us, scarred face and dried blood armor on the ground that remembers, and he did not move. One man's conscience can be replaced. But he wasn't one man anymore. He was a man standing in front of a whole station, and behind him the whole arm was watching through every comm relay the Avani could light up Petra's idea, that, get it out live, make it loud, and his own soldiers stood there looking at their commander with his back to the condemned, and they had to do the same math we all had. They had to decide whether they were one man each, or whether they were something else. What happened? I'm not going to tell you it was clean. It wasn't. There was a long, long moment where I genuinely thought the soldiers would fire. Some of them wanted to. I learned later that one officer, a hard one, an old true believer in the curdled law, actually gave the order. Gave it twice. Nobody moved. That was the whole thing. That was everything. 1,000 soldiers of the Iron Column, the most disciplined killers in that part of the sky, got an order to clear the dock, and not one of them took a step. Because their commander stood between them and the thing they were ordered to do, and because behind him stood a whole drum of people who had decided, all at once, that they would rather die standing together than live having watched. And discipline is a strange thing. It cuts both ways. You train men to follow the one who does not move. And then one day the one who does not move is standing on the wrong side of your order, and the training holds, and it carries them somewhere the people who built it never meant them to go. The hard officer drew his own weapon to enforce the order himself. And the soldier next to him put a hand on his arm. Just that, one soldier, one hand on one arm, and then another, And the order died right there on the dock in the quiet under the hum. I watched the iron column refuse to murder a station. I watched it happen one hand at a time. It came apart fast after that, the way these things do. The council did declare the column renegade. Sauron had known they would. But it didn't go the way the law was built to make it go, because it wasn't one man and it wasn't even one station anymore. By the time the council moved, the whole arm had seen it. Every new species. Every poor little folding chair drum out on the edge where they parked the ones who didn't matter. They'd all watched 1,000 soldiers refuse, and they'd all watched a crowd of nobodies stand, and you can't unshow people a thing like that. The council could call it renegade all they wanted. The word didn't stick the way it used to. The trick only works while everybody believes it works, and we'd broken the belief live on every relay the Avony could reach. The Senate refugees got out. All 29 of the living ones, the 19 children. Karen, the fat, smiling merchant, cried like a baby when they cleared the dock. I saw it. Tully, Marcus J. Tully, accessory, age 19. Tully spent the whole standoff up near the front of the crowd, white as a sheet, doing that nervous laugh of his under his breath the whole time like he was apologizing in advance for being alive. He's still out there, last I heard. Runs cargo. Legal stuff now. Asks what's in the boxes. I'd like to tell you the galaxy turned good after that. It didn't. The galaxy's still enormous and terrifying and mostly indifferent, and the pump still leaks. That's the lesson, remember. The pump still leaks and you still have to fix it. But something did change. Something small and stubborn got loose out there on the edge, in the folding chair rooms, among the species nobody took seriously. A new idea about what a person is worth and what a crowd is worth, and what the word alone is actually hiding. The big old species had forgotten it, somewhere across their 10,000 years. We were too new to know it was impossible, so we did it anyway. That's what humans turned out to be good for out there. Not the fighting. We were never any good at the fighting. We were good at not knowing when to give up. We were good at the loud idea at the dead end of the night cycle. We were good at walking up to the thing everybody else had made peace with and pulling on it until it moved. The dock. I saw Sauron one more time. On the dock, before the dark ship pulled away, they let him keep it. His 1,000 went with him. The column that refused became something else, something the old promise might have recognized. Where they stand now, I hope the ground remembers the right thing. He found me in the crowd. Big scarred man, dried blood armor, that one sharp eye. He stood over me the way he had that first night. And for a second the fear came right back up out of my stomach, old habit. Then he held out one of those huge hands, and it wasn't shaking anymore. You asked me when I last slept, he said. The translator put it in my ear a half-second behind, like always. In 90 years no one asked me that. They saw the armor. You saw the man holding the cup. He almost smiled, that rusty door of a thing. It is a small question. I do not think you understand what it did. I'm not sure I understand anything that happened, I said, and that was the truth. Then understand this. He closed his hand around mine, careful, the way you'd hold something you just learned was breakable. Your kind will not last long out here if you keep this up. You feel too much. You refuse the numbers. You walk up to the thing that should kill you and you ask it how it slept. The eye held mine. And it will get most of you killed. But the ones it does not kill, he paused. And I felt the hum of the station come up through the floor, low and slow, that heartbeat you could finally hear. The ones it does not kill will change everything they touch. As you changed me. So go on feeling too much, small human. The galaxy has had 10,000 years of those who knew better. I think it is ready for some who do not. Then the dark ship took him, and the dock sealed, and the hum went back to its quiet work. And I went and found a pump that needed fixing, because something always does. People ask me what the question was, the one that changed everything. They always think it was something clever, something brave. It wasn't. It was the dumbest, smallest, most human thing in the world. I just asked a tired man when he last slept. And it turned out nobody, in 90 years, had ever bothered to wonder if he was tired at all. So if you ever find yourself standing in front of something huge and terrible and certain, something everybody else has already made their peace with, something the numbers say can't be moved, don't try to be brave. You're probably not brave. I'm sure not. Just look close enough to find the man holding the cup and ask him the small question. You'd be amazed what doesn't get asked out there in all that dark, and you'd be amazed what one quiet question can move.